Okay, let me get on my Zoom. All right. Welcome, beautiful humans, as we talk about a very important subject that has always resided there with us. Our death and our mortality has always been there. I think that now with the coronavirus, um, it's very much more um, visible to us. And of course, because we don't discuss it very often, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear and uncertainty. And we're also trying to reform how we grieve. So this is a great discussion. We've got some beautiful folks here with experience. I'm going to introduce them. We'll start. Y'all introduce yourself on. Sandy, you want to go first?
Okay, so my name is Sandy McLean Clockner, and in a traditional way, Kamama Indishnakas Wabashibanesi Indishnakas Mangan and Dodam. I'm of Cherokee and African heritage, and I belong to the Native Women's Care Circle. I'm also an educational consultant, 35 years with the Rockwood School District, and teaching classes over at St. Charles Community Center. So welcome everybody, and I hope that this is beneficial to you.
Julia, you want to
go? Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Ho. I'm the founder of Solidarity Economy. I'm just here to support the discussion and, look at the questions you all are submitting. And so whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, feel free to use the chat or the comment section to ask questions or give your perspective. Pass it to Selena.
Hi, I am Selena Birch. I am Solidarity Economy's project coordinator. I do energy work. I really pushed kind of like Debo Vega into doing this because I just felt like grief and loss was coming up. It was coming up in my family with losing people from the virus. And I feel like grief for me hasn't been such an isolated thing in the past. And the virus makes it feel like it has to be now. And so I just wanted to have like an open discussion and give people a space to talk about grief and practices of grief and for grief that aren't necessarily traditional in the American sense or in the sense of how we have navigated grief when we have had more access to community and people immediately, if that makes sense.
So. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, my name is Elizabeth Vega, and I'm an activist, but death and dying in a way that is beautiful and has dignity has been as much of my passion as social justice work. And it came from many experiences. I am Chicana, and so in our culture, children were often taken to funerals, but there was very little explanation about it. There was, I grew up Catholic, so there was like the rosaries and the visitations. But as a child, I often remember observing it and watching it, but not having any context. I survived my childhood by hanging out with elders. And for that reason, I was, even as a teenager, was around a lot of older seniors, and therefore was in my first death when I was 16 years old is when I first somebody transitioned. But most of my learning came from the experiences with my daughter. I had a daughter that was born with a malignant brain tumor. And because of my previous medical experience and my medical experience with elders and also during the AIDS crisis, even though I was only 25 years old and I had this dying infant, I remember that I had to fight the medical system to put her in hospice. And because I knew intuitively that she was going to die. And so the question was not if she was going to die, but rather how she was going to die. And made the decision to bring her home with hospice. And was it hard? Yes, it was absolutely, difficult. But there were moments of grace that we had through that experience that completely shaped how I now grieve, how I mourn, and my approach to death. And some of those were, my sons were 7 and 5 at the time. And I was real open with them about what was happening, that she was with us now, but that she was going to die. And so we had to show her as much of life as possible. And my children, who were 5 and 7 at the time, were like, well, she can't die until she tastes cotton candy. She can't die until she sees this. And so it became this celebration of, yes, you are dying, but you're living now. And my sons would sing to her at her crib. And on the day that she was actively dying, because there's different phases of people going through death, but she was actively dying, meaning that she was probably only going to last another 24 hours. We had the hospice nurse remove her tube, her feeding tube, and we took her to the park. And she felt the wind on her face, and other children came by to admire her. And my sons would jump off the swing and they would come and kiss her. And it was this moment of really understanding that, yes, I was mourning, but even in that moment, I was content in my sorrow because it was a good last day. The grief experience, when you lose a child, it's oftentimes people say that that's the loss that is just so hard because it's out of the natural order of things. But in my opinion, loss is loss is loss is loss. And there were lessons that I learned, and I was transformed by that grief. We often think that when we experience loss, that the pieces of our heart, of our broken heart, are just going to fall out on the floor because it's that unsettling. I learned that your heart does break, but when it breaks in that way, there's canyons where love can reside now. I love without fear now because I have learned that we're all afraid of losing that which we love, but it's inevitable. And we have within us the ability to grieve, to mourn, to remember, and to not only survive these losses, but thrive, grow, and be transformed by them. And, there was a point when I lost my daughter that I thought that I would never laugh again, never have it go beyond my throat. The grief was so visceral that my arms ached to hold her. The reason that people talk about heartache and heartbreak is because during that grief experience, like, you actually feel the physical pain of heartbreak. You have a perpetual lump in your throat. I think that that's what I was most shocked and learned about, was the physical nature of grief. And it's because it's transformative. You're trying to take the living, breathing presence of a person and transform that into living, breathing memory. One of the things that brought me comfort during that time was, in my culture, we are Dia de los Muertos is so important. And it's the idea that there are 3 deaths. the death when your heart stops beating, the death when you're placed in the ground, and the third and most significant death when there's no one left to remember. So, in these times when we cannot physically bury our dead, physically gather to mourn them, the idea of sharing story, of remembering, of creating yearly rituals where where we get to name our dead and share the stories is very, very significant for several reasons. One, I think you don't ever really achieve closure. You have what I call integration. You
Mhm.
integrate that loss into your life and your being, and it becomes part of who you are. My daughter was born May 25th, and she died June the 9th. And every year, 27 years later, I feel it. I feel the tender places, but it's also a marker of my evolution because time smooths off the edges, but there's still that loss. But that also is a gift because I'm still in relationship with her in a completely different way, but still in relationship with her. So I'm gonna open up the conversation. I did a lot of life celebrations for folks where, hospice work, where I help people write their life stories, write letters to their loved ones saying goodbye, do life celebrations. Oftentimes when people are dying or elderly or in hospice care, we think that they are already dead, and so I would always ask my hospice clients, what three things would you like to do before you die? And I did three because the first one was often kind of surface, the second one goes a little deeper, but the third wish always seemed to be where the whimsy was, where the dream was. So like I had a 90-year-old woman who wanted to ride the Ferris wheel one last time. So we got her up on the Ferris wheel, and up at the top of the Ferris wheel, she said, I think that this is what dying would be like. And while she was on her deathbed, because at that, we didn't have the COVID like we have now, I was able to be with her at her deathbed. I was able to tell her all the stories of that she had retold me about her life, and also include the metaphor of the Ferris wheel ride that she rode, and that it would be like that. I had another woman who wanted to ride a horse one last time. And I remember the hospice doctor saying, I don't understand why you want to get this woman on this horse. And I was like, if you saw the look in her eye when she talked about it, you would understand. And so, with a team of volunteers, we lifted her up on the horse, and she rode the horse smiling and joyful, got off the horse, threw up in a bucket, got back on the horse, and rode again. So, this pandemic offers us a unique opportunity to be cognizant of our mortality as well as the mortality of those we love, but also to be very present in the moment, telling people what we feel now, not waiting until the last minute to, have that deathbed conversation, to have that conversation in life. It's also a reminder of us of like, how do we want to be remembered? How do we want to love? How do we want to, if we died yesterday, died to today, what would people say about you? How would you, how do you want to be, remembered through the ages after your body's gone? Oftentimes in psychology, they talk about building how you want to be remembered, and that's always like waiting for retirement, right? But to me, that's a reflection of a capitalist model on dying, because really we should be living like every day is like going to be our last day, because we don't know what's going to happen. we like to think that we're in control of all of the stuff, but really, we really don't know. And that's why the pandemic has got everybody up and anxious, because suddenly what's always been there is now all around us, and there's no denying our mortality. So I would like to open it up to questions. Let's have a discussion. Sandy said, go ahead, Sandy, read what you wrote.
Well, one of the limitations we have right now is that our societal norms have changed.
Yep.
And, we have this majority culture way that a lot of us have been taught to mourn. And that's, you have a social gathering, you have a funeral, you put someone into the ground, you have life celebrations. And those are modern ways of doing that. And with all the limitations we have, there are very few autopsies because of the risk of COVID. We also have a situation where you can't be with that person when they're in the hospital. And a lot of us are not just with social distancing. I have a friend whose father passed, and she's in St. Louis and he was in New York. And literally people in our community that pass, and the only way they pass is somebody mentions it on social media or you get an email. So there's no gathering, there's no going to the funeral, there's no taking by, we used to go by their homes and take them food and meet at the funeral parlor. So there are lots of limitations on us right now. And I've gone through death with some people, and being present, having touch is one of the last things that you know that they feel, is that touch. But we can't touch our loved ones when they're in the hospital. You're lucky if you get a Facebook or a FaceTime with them, and then there's no body. So we've got these changes that are happening, and all of a sudden you're left in your house and oh, this team member of mine just passed. What do I do? And you're left with a hollow feeling, as well as that lump in your throat. You're still mourning, you still want to cry, but you still have to go on. Some of us still have to work. There's no defining way of, oh, this person is gone, this person is celebrated. And those are the things that we have to deal with now. And Mike,
we have to, we're in a unique opportunity where we get to reimagine, how do we want to grieve and mourn? And in the same, go ahead, Sandy.
Not only is it reimagine and come up with some new things, but also go back to some traditions that were left behind because they were more inconvenient. In the Native American culture, there's no fast mourning. It isn't, you gather at the funeral parlor and then it's done. A lot of us follow where, you have a year, you have multiple years. It's not that grief goes away, and we recognize that, and bringing back some of those ideas I think will help young ones who didn't have to maybe deal with sitting 4 days with a loved one's body, and or going through Shiva, or some of the other old traditional ways that we did things.
That's why I love Dia de los Muertos so much, because it's a yearly gathering, and it's a year, and there's always that moment when like, I believe in naming the ancestors. So Marlene Schumer, who recently passed, she was I think I even have a picture of her. Where is my picture? Well, I should have pulled it. But the first time that we put her on the Dia de los Muertos ofrenda, and when more than one person brought a picture of her for the ofrenda, the other thing that I love about Dia de los Muertos is that oftentimes one of the questions that we ask when we are face death is the why me question, and I always tell the story of like, when my daughter passed, because the anger is real. Anger is the universe's way of letting you know that something is unfair, right? And death, by its very nature, we always want more time. And even though it's part of life, there's a period where you do feel the unfairness of that. And there's a real anger with that. And I remember getting really angry at the universe and looking up at the sky and asking, why me? And the answer I got was, why not you? You're not any different than anybody else. Why not you? And then a couple of days later, I saw an interview with Gloria Vanderbilt, whose son had committed suicide. And in the interview, she said that she asked the why me question. And the answer she got back was, why not? And then a couple of days after that, I saw a Hagar, the horrible cartoon, and the storm was there, and he was at the bow of the ship, and he had his fist raised, and he was like, why me? And the universe, that answer that came back from the clouds was like, why not? And so there's a consistency about the fact that inevitably we all will die, and inevitably we will lose somebody that we love. It is the price that we pay for loving. But with Dia de los Muertos, that is communalized. And we are able to see, oh, you experienced this. Oh, you experienced this. It takes away from the personal aspect of the loss itself and brings it down to the memory aspect that we all can remember. And then the other reason that I love Dia de los Muertos, especially in this time, like I think hopefully we won't be in quarantine, or I'll have to figure out a different way to do it. But I think that the gathering and collective mourning that's going to come from a Dia de los Muertos celebration this year is going to be really impactful.
It's one of those things. I'm wondering how people are seeing the acknowledgement of mourning with all the restrictions. How are you seeing things? I know they mentioned she saw a funeral procession, motorcycles and a car, and the car basically it was a bodiless funeral procession where they were honoring somebody, and all the vehicles, all the bikes were honoring that person even though they didn't have a body. I know that right now they just the Navajo Nation, some people have called for a 4-day fire where wherever you're at, light a fire and pray at that fire for 4 days, because there are more deaths from COVID in the Navajo Nation than some states. So they're asking for prayer and people to sit and mourn and keep that fire going for 4 days. So those are some things that people are doing. But I'm wondering, what have you seen, people using right now to help with mourning? Because we can always take those ideas and use them because we're going to need them.
Yeah. So I think now would be a great chance to introduce Jaquee. She's joined us, and she has been working on this a lot. And I would like to, get your opinion on this and what you've seen.
Hey family, first of all, thank y'all for creating this space. My name is Jaquee, pronouns she, her, hers. And I've partnered with my mom for the past 1.5 years, and together we've created a platform called Blessed Are the Bereaved. And our focus is on creating safe spaces for community members to grieve. And so that's one leg of the work that we're doing. Another leg is our companioning workshops. And so we bring people together to have conversations and offer practical skills and tools to support, loved ones that we encounter who may need that support while they're grieving. And so recently, as a pivot in response to COVID-19, we've been hosting groups that focus on naming our grief in ways that it shows up for us, and just creating safe spaces to talk about that. And so it's no like stark structure. It really is just taking up space for folks to talk, and offering resources when folks want to name or better understand what it is that they're feeling. And so I should clarify that we're not necessarily mental health professionals. Well, I'm not. My mom actually is a therapist, but yeah, we don't do it in the spirit of being mental health professionals necessarily. We're just community members creating safe space and learning more about what that means.
That sounds beautiful. That sounds, because I do think that you don't need to be a mental health professional to have these grief discussions, right? I think that I personally believe that the discussions about grief and loss and death and dying should be part of as natural as the discussion as birth is, and should be part of the daily fabric of our life where we discuss it. Because we, like, again, we don't ever, there's not closure. There's only integration, and it's a lifelong process. I kind of describe it like a spiral. Like, you seem like you're revisiting the same issue over and over again, but you come at it at a higher level of understanding. And that has been a lot, like with my grief journey, is going, feeling it and feeling it, how it changes over the years, but also how it stays quite the same in some way.
Yeah.
One of the things that is surprising to me and interesting, and to me, there's an old curse that says, may you live in interesting times. They're very boring right now. One of the interesting conundrums is I've got people from certain privilege that are saying, well, who do you know personally that's died? What's all this big to do about social distancing? Who do you know that's died? And for a while, there wasn't a personal connection. And because of the way this is hit across the country, all of a sudden, it's not, oh, well, a friend of mine, so-and-so died. All of a sudden, it's a team member that's on my group died, or my cousin has died, or in one case, I know in New York, this one gentleman, he was sheltering with his mother and his brother, and both of them died. His mother and his brother died. He said that they weren't diagnosed with COVID because they weren't tested, but they were showing all the symptoms, and that they couldn't pick up his mother's body for 9 hours in the apartment. Those are, things you hear about, but all of a sudden, when it's Reverend Ted, I know that's died, or someone personal, and whether on the chat or opening up the mutes and asking people, who's had someone they actually know die, and then what are you doing about it? Because I think we need to let people have those discussions.
Yeah, so I want to chime in. So one of the reasons that I originally kind of pushed to have this conversation was because my cousin was diagnosed with the virus, and he was living with his grandmother at the time, and she passed, and we weren't able to bury her, and we weren't able to even see him until weeks had passed. And we grew up very Christian, and so there was only this desire to mourn in a very Christian way. And so I talked to my brother about the way that I had learned to mourn that is not seen as okay in a lot of Black Christian households. And I lost my grandparents on my father's side. My grandfather killed himself and my grandmother. And the way that they died, we weren't able to traditionally mourn them. And so I didn't really make peace with it until years later, until when I was introduced to how to make an ancestor shrine. and how to give offering and to have those conversations that you weren't able to have before. And so it's been a process of trying to convince my cousin that is not against his God or his religion to honor this ancestor and to commune with this ancestor in this more traditional way than Christianity has afforded us to, unless it's like, you know, Mother Mary, so to speak.
Well, that's the impact of colonization, right?
Yeah.
You know, because Black and brown and indigenous communities have been plugged into the ancestors for a very, for hundreds of years. But, I think that part of the reason that the colonialism wanted to quash that is because, death is powerful, grieving is powerful, and it's transformative. And so taking people's cultures of how they grieve, how they mourn, how they remember, is a genocide tactic, actually.
Yeah.
And so reclaiming that ancestor wall, I think, is really important. I want to show you mine. I just redid mine during the COVID, and if you look up, there is a picture of my mother, who I never got to meet, and my grandmothers. And then I also have it in conjunction with my altar, which has all kinds of stones and rocks and traditions with it. And so, that is the remembering for my ancestors happens on a daily basis. It's not just 3 days or 4 days of bereavement. And from my perspective and my ancestor work, it's also generational healing, because we all have complicated relationships in our families. And I believe and that when somebody dies, that they are stripped away also of the baggage of the body that comes with it. The pain, the compulsions, the shame, and all of that. And so they have the opportunity to operate from their highest and most divine nature. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing around my mother, because I never got to meet her, has been generational healing as well. And that's why she's so prominent on my ancestor wall, because I was given up for adoption and she died before I met her. But one of the things that I did, because I reunited with her 12 years after she died, I went and gathered all her stories. And I was able to know and understand her and who she was through the stories of everybody that she met. And for me, like, one of the works that I've been doing is so my mother was married to someone else when she got pregnant with me, and she chose to give me up for adoption. And because she chose to give me up for adoption, and she was married to a military man, she delivered me on the base. And the commander of the base did not let the social workers come on to the base so that they could surrender, so she could surrender me to them. Instead, he made her walk 2 miles from the hospital to the base of the gates to surrender me. And when I reunited with the family, I got the file, and it said that when she handed me to the social workers, that she mourned. She fell on the ground and she cried, and she said she didn't know that it was going to be that hard. So in my work this year, I've been doing a lot of work around healing and boundary work and generational work. And I did a meditation, a self-compassion meditation, where I tapped into the loss that she was feeling during that 2-mile walk, and have been doing a lot of inner work for myself and inner, healing work for her, based off of that walk. And it's not requiring anything but meditation and love, really, to do it, and tapping into it.
One of the things that we've done recently with a friend whose father passed, we have water blessing on Sundays, and with the social distancing, it's changed a bit, but we can at least all meet at the river. And when we had our loved person come who was mourning, we did some things like we took paper and wrote some wonderful things about that person, and then we put them in the Mississippi. I know another wonderful thing that's kind of happened with social media. My which is like a godmother. She's up at the White Earth Reservation up in Minnesota, in Nadawash, Minnesota. And she's had 2 daughters who have committed suicide. And it was just Danielle's birthday over the weekend. So all weekend long, she's been asking questions about Danielle. What was her favorite food? Who knows her favorite color? And people that know the answers first on social media, she puts up a prize for them. She sends a pair of earrings. She sends them like a journal or things like that. And I know that there's a lot of anger with suicide, and in this family there's been multiple attempts of suicide, and it's really prevalent up on the reservations. So we've had our own epidemic within the epidemic. And I know it was always a good thing when I saw those questions up there, because then I remember Danielle in a really good way, not in the fact that she killed herself. Another thing is journaling. If you have a loved one and you've lost them, writing down those feelings, because you're going to feel anger, you're going to feel tired, you're going to feel like never ending, and getting through that without having somebody to hold you and hug you. Sometimes you're going to have to hug yourself, and journaling's one good way to do that. Another thing that we do in our family is we have what's called a ghost dinner. And for my father, on his birthday or the day that he transitioned, we'll do a family meal. And you can do that where in more than one household, you're having a meal. But what we do is we set a place out for him. And we have his favorite foods, and we talk about some of the good stories. And that is a wonderful thing to have our ghost dinners.
It is. And I think that folks could do storytelling gatherings for people who've passed on Zoom even, and have it be story related, maybe not religious related with the body and everything, but do gather on Zoom and tell the stories and remember together. I think it's interesting in Western culture how short and prescribed, when somebody dies, it's like that production kind of mentality. They die, they're gone, and they're never talked about again. At one point for BJC Hospice, I set up a Dia de los Muertos community altar in front of Mocha Bees. And people came, and just the act of, they were writing the names of loved ones who had passed on a butterfly and adding that name to a big wall of others who had added that. And I cannot tell you the number of people who broke down and cried because they had held it in that whole time. And it was the first time they had in years had even written out the name of the person who had passed and thought about it. And, it was really healing because we gathered in this beautiful tent with butterflies and candles and pictures and bread, and people shared their stories of life, but they also shared their stories of mourning. And that really reiterated for me how it's we do need better ways to grieve that are more in touch with the lifelong process of it, instead of, oh, this is your bereavement days and then you should be moving on, and the awkwardness that people have around it. Do we have questions or anything that people in particular want to know? We've got about 15 minutes, and I would like to just open it up for questions.
Hi everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to speak because I'm just floored by the immense wisdom of these powerful women who I'm very grateful to call my friends. And the friend that Sandy keeps talking about is me. And I got like a million messages from different people saying that I have to listen to this panel. And as you were all talking, all these images of various altars that I have seen came flooding, whether it was the stuffed animal altars in Ferguson, when Ferguson happened, all over the city, all the way down to Shaw neighborhood, to there was an artist that contributed a metal sculpture that was etched with the rolling curves of the American flag and dropped off in Union Square for folks during 9/11 to who didn't know where their loved ones were. And I lived through that. And they would gather with their votives and their notes, and it was such a immense outpouring of public mourning. And I think the most difficult thing about this is I realized my mourning, as private as I want it to be, I feel the urge to share in all the traditions and the ways in which my community has supported me since living in St. Louis for nearly 10 years. And I cannot even, it's very overwhelming to even think about how I'm going to thank everybody that all my friends who have sent food, and it's almost like, okay, if I don't eat this, they're gonna be really mad.
I think the food is interesting too, because it's like, it is very much in the present, right? It is very much like, okay, we need to do the day-to-day kinds of things. The thing with loss is that it's like the loss is there and real life continues to move around that. And so it's almost like you're standing in two different time zones, right? There's the immediacy of the now of what you're feeling of like the morning, but then you still have to eat. The bills still have to get paid, all of that. And so it's the food, I think people deliver it because that's what they know. Was it helpful? Eileen, was the food helpful?
Yes, because particularly like, I don't know, I could just hear my friends wondering, oh, I hope it was good enough, or I hope she ate it. And I'm like trying, my immigrant roots are like, don't waste any of the food. So I had to like, it took all my power to actually tell one of my care coordinators, like, please tell everyone to stop sending food because I can't like play Tetris with my fridge and it's exhausting. And because in reality, there's no one here to take care of me, to like write down where the flowers are from, or feed the cat, or like to allow me to sleep and allow me to like get full rest and tell me that it's okay not to go back to work, even though I'm an essential mental health care worker. So it's very difficult for me to leave my clients behind. And it's very important that I know that my coworkers got them. So I have Shay, what did I think of earlier? Shay Ho Cuisina, because the lovely and amazing Julia Ho, since we honored Ancestor Day according to the Chinese calendar in early April, I believe it was, I evoked things that I had learned from living in other parts of the States, in which sharing resources was very important, and being fed by your chosen family. My Asian sisters in St. Louis has been an enormous blessing. And I want to give a shout out to Ja and Anya and Steph Cole and Julia and Selena and Jason K and Christina Meneses. Where are my Filipino girls at? And and Vega being there at the beginning and at the end of like a very parting and difficult celebration of transition, when I could not go to my family in New York, where it's very heartbreaking to see my city go through all of that heavy, colossal mourning all over again. But I feel very held by my sisters here in all the traditions, in all the ways, down to Shabbat on Friday, because I grew up across the street from a synagogue on West 13th Street in Gravesend, Brooklyn. And my family was not very religious at all. So I always wondered what the Hasidic Jews were doing every Saturday and every Friday evening. And my mother explained that they turn off the lights and they observe what the ancestors did when they had no electricity, and they try not to use any power for all, I think it's all of Saturday. So the Shabbat kind of is the gateway, I believe. And someone who understands more of the Torah can probably fill that in. But from St. Louis, I've learned a lot more about Oshun and the Yoruba traditions. And I think that as an art therapist, and from over 15 years of community organizing and activism, you just learn how to weave whatever you got, especially as a queer person coming out of a culture or a community where you can painfully feel like an outsider. You learn from a very early age, sometimes 13, 16, or even earlier, that the family that gave birth to you may not be the family that understands you the most. And so it's sometimes a frustrating acknowledgement to learn that over and over, especially when a loved one within that circle of your childhood passes away. No matter what state of the relationships were, it's still a parting gift.
Mm-hmm. Will you tell us a little bit, either you or Julia, tell us a little bit about the celebration that you all did in April?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about it and why I think it was really important for me. Not even just thinking about, it wasn't at the time. I had already planned on doing this before the pandemic really hit. And it was because it stuck out to me as like one of the most powerful experiences I had being in Taiwan with my family. And I think just the rhythm of kind of thinking of ritual, like the whole country operates on a lunar year calendar. There's like the sort of Western calendar, but when you think culturally of like how people think about the seasons and how people celebrate, it's like all revolved around the lunar year. And so one of the most important lunar year holidays is Qingmingjie, which is basically Ancestor Day or Tomb Sweeping Day. And so the big practice of that is that everybody spends that time going out to their ancestors' graves and, you know, cleaning them up. And so I just have this funny memory of like being with my grandmother because we were trying to honor my grandfather, and she was like, "Well, they brought his ashes over here and spread them out, so we don't need to go over there and like sweep his tomb." And it just kind of made me think a little bit because I was like, "Well, how can I invite some of my Asian family here to take that practice, even though like our ancestors physically aren't here, like they're thousands of miles away. We might not even know where they are or like where they're buried, or if they are, like we don't have easy access to them physically." And so my original plan was actually to like go to some unmarked graves in St. Louis and to visit the graves of like former slaves, and to kind of extend that care towards other people's ancestors or towards the ancestors of people who are here. And yeah, and so when the pandemic hit, and it wasn't, at first I was like really sad because I was like, well, how are we going to gather? You know, we can't get together physically. We can't like eat food, which is the thing that we do like 90% of the time when we get together.
Everything involves food.
Food obsessed people. So I was trying to think about how to adapt it, and then eventually I was just tired and exhausted, and I was like, well, why don't we just like gather on Zoom and talk? And it ended up being a very sweet like moment because we hadn't really talked to each other or seen each other much. And I think because of all also like experiencing like being Asian right now too, we didn't even talk about that necessarily, but it was just like seeing each other's faces was like a nice reminder that like we're here for each other. And then yeah, I remember Jason shared like some really beautiful experiences about like how he's like using this opportunity of like having a bit more time to do things intentionally and like really cultivating his ancestor practice. And so most of our call was like him telling us about like the very specifics of like what his altars are, what sort of practices he's learning about to communicate with ancestors. And something he said that really stuck out was like, how do you tap into the healthy ancestors? And so like recognizing that like all ancestors are not necessarily created equal, and like being able to think about like, you know, what are the sort of the like the loving nature of ancestors, and how far do you need to reach back to like tap into that and like bring it into the present. So all of those things were really helpful for me. And like, again, they weren't necessarily pandemic related, but having to like shift that energy into something now was really, you know, it was really powerful and really interesting.
I do think that we need to recognize too that mourning does not necessarily have to correlate just with someone dying. I think that collectively as a world right now, we are mourning because there's no way that we are not going to be completely changed by what the past few months, right? This pandemic is going to change our old life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, but we do have to sort of mourn the things that we're going to probably have to let go, you know? And I'm actually mourning hugs quite a bit. I can't wait till the quarantine is over so that I can really hug people. But you know, it's going to fundamentally change our lives and the world. And you know, even when we went through Ferguson, that experience changed us. And I mourned my old simple life pre-Ferguson, but really did that so that I could embrace this new one that we live in now. And so I think that how we grieve ultimately determines how we live our lives. And that's where the lesson is. You know, that's why I think it's so important that we have humanity and dignity when we die, because it ultimately can point us in a trajectory about how to live. and how to live boldly and with courage and love.
Yeah. I do really quickly want to touch on something that Julia said about like the good ancestors versus the bad ancestors. And because this is something that I really struggled with when I decided to go ahead and do my ancestor shrine, was the fact that my pawpaw had, you know, killed himself and my grandmother, and had kind of been deemed in my heart as kind of a quote unquote bad ancestor. And through research, and I won't get into it because it's super long, but there's some traditions that believe that giving your bad ancestors space, if you can make peace or trying to make peace with it, gives them an opportunity to atone for their mistakes and to divine on the other half, on the other life side of things, on the veil for you, and to move in the spirit world for you in a way that they failed to move in this world for you. And it's tricky because, you know, with ancestors, sometimes there's just really bad blood of how they moved when they were living and the relationship that you had with them. But I think for me, and the guidance that I had at the time with the ancestor work and the research that I was doing did move me to go ahead and eventually put my pawpaw on my ancestor shrine, and to really take time to forgive him and to figure out what the good parts of him were. And when you do ancestor work, it may sound very, very kooky, but there is this relationship that forms with your ancestors, and you start to feel some of their feelings. And that can get really tricky too with spirit work. But then like you start to want to put certain things on the shrine that you might not have really known that they liked, and there may be things that you like or things that you would never think about. And it develops this closeness that allows you to have more of a forgiving space with an ancestor who may have just really left a bad taste in your mouth. And I feel like my relationship with my pawpaw before he passed was just pretty estranged, to be honest. But then after he died, I just felt so much resentment and anger towards him. And through the ancestor work and that's, I think they call it ancestor work because it is work. Okay, let's clarify. You don't just make a shrine and it's all good. It's not like that. It is actual work. Yes. It is the grieving process, and the ancestor work is genuine work, and forgiving certain things and learning that you already have some of these bad traits in you from your ancestors, whether you recognize it or not. And sometimes doing the ancestor work makes it come up and you're like, oh, I have that. That is a part of how I move, and healing that in yourself is a huge thing. But I do think that it's safe, or it can be safe, let me clarify, to allow the ancestor work and the shrines and the ritual of it all to be a part of the healing of that relationship, even though that person is deceased, if that makes sense.
Hey, Selena, this went exactly with what I was thinking from what Vega said. And in the Native American sense, we believe that what we do affects 7 generations in front of us. And we also believe that it affects 7 generations behind us. So when you do the work and when you do the healing, you're not only healing yourself, and you're also healing the path in front of you and healing the path behind you. So those ancestors that were a little questionable are still there along your line. You carry them, and when you heal yourself, you're healing them. And that's an important thing to realize, that sometimes if you do the listening, you'll find that, you know, we believe that when someone passes for 4 days, they're very close and around us. And you'll find all of a sudden something that you were looking for, they move to another spot, or that you smell a smell that you know belonged to them. And when they're close like that, it's a little easier to listen to them, but listening to their lessons. Sometimes you're going to hear from those ancestors, you know, hey, I'm working on this still through you. And the other thing I wanted to say, because I know we have to end for some practice.
We have to end? I don't know. Do we have to end?
What we can do though is, this can be something that happens again, but for a lot of your elders, we don't do Zoom. We don't do that big social media thing. And if you get some cards and write to someone who's mourning, if you get some, just some, even delivering things to their porch, artificial flowers. Look at the things that you have. You can give away some of that material stuff, Lysol it or whatever you want to do. The meal thing that we did, we dropped off a meal in a box to one person, and then they took that meal to Eileen. And that was a practical thing that we could do. That bodiless funeral procession where everybody stayed in their vehicles, set a time for it, drive past their house, honk. Another thing that people need to really know that them is music and art. And if you can do some music and some art around those people that maybe you have lost, that helps with healing.
I'll tell you another thing that I used to help people write letters to their loved ones saying goodbye. Because, this was in a hospice context. And the letters were very story focused. But one of the things that I would do was ask the person that was dying, well, what do you want people to do when they miss you? And I called it reaching back and reaching forward. And so literally I would have the folks that were dying would be like, on the day that you miss me, do, this. Like one woman was like, I want you to go to a street corner and sing Margaritaville at the top of your lungs. Another person was like, there's the spot at the swing and you can go there and, you could do that with folks who have experienced loss. Like, what did you used to do with that person that passed that was something that was special to you? And then do it together. Is it like going for, the special meal, or is it playing the song? And, what that does is that allows you to tap into the memory of the person that passed, but it also connects you very much into the land of the living and now, which I think is really essential when you're grieving, to be able to be in both places, because that's where you are. You're mourning, but you're also living.
I think that's a great.
I saw a question. Was there a question, Julia? Are we ending it?
Well, so Gina had mentioned something about like honoring ancestors that have been ignored or neglected by family, especially if they've had traumatic experiences or dealt with anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. So maybe we can speak to that quickly and then kind of wrap up. I also want to give a chance. I know Tina's here, Erica's here. So if they all want to close out with any thoughts, would like to hear from them. But yeah.
So for me, when I'm doing the ancestor work, one of the things, and this is a recent practice that I started doing that's really powerful, because I've been doing meditation, and I have a meditation that is like, may you be happy, may you be full of joy, may you experience peace, may you live life with ease, may you not suffer, may you live life to the fullest potential. And so for my neglected ancestors, and I have some, and ancestors that do healing work, I will pick one to do that meditation with. And so it's for me and them, and it's that link. And that's one way that I do it. And then also remembering them on the ancestor wall, because when you have the pictures there that are physically a representation, it's easier to focus in and be like, oh, I see you. And I know that in your life, you were not seen, but I see you now and I feel your energy now.
Hi, Tina. And thank you, Vega. That is a really good suggestion. I really like that.
So go take it, Julia. I'm out. No.
Cool. Well, Tina, Erica, anybody want to share any last words or thoughts? We've thought about, this is our first time hosting this particular format or discussion, and we'd like to continue with it. And, we know this is going to be a long process, so we don't look at this as a one-time thing. But yeah, I would like to just open up for any last words, and then we can kind of close out.
Thanks for hosting this. I know this is a very important kind of conversation, especially right now and during what we're going through. I'm sorry I was late. I actually just found out about it and had a hard time getting in, but I figured it out. So I think probably the one thing that that I've just become more conscious of is that people are continuing to repeat the words, the new normal, as though this is something that's never happened before. And I think what can help bring it into a little different place inside of us, maybe a little bit less traumatic feeling, is to shift that language and to bring it into the concept of this actually is normal. It's just not something we've lived through before. Yeah. But this is normal in the process of the world, in the process of disease or sickness or human survival and resilience. This is normal. And so I think that, especially tying it into the ancestral aspect that you were talking about, this is a beautiful opportunity for us to be very mindful of and honor everything that our ancestors endured that allowed us to become into existence and to be living through this right now. We can honor, their struggles, but we can also rely on their spiritual strength, because they're now in a different realm, but they're fully accessible to us. And we can reach to that and know that they can lend that strength and resilience to us from the spirit world for us to exponentially gain strength and endurance to move through this process with determination and dignity. We don't have to be so afraid. Even the medical community is referring to this as some kind of a demon, right? Like this is some kind of a monster. It's just nature. This is just nature doing what nature does. And so we are part of nature as well. And all things have that duality in them. And so I think if we can, use these ancestral processes of honoring and connection, it can help us to shift into a better space of living through this. And then we're a better resources for those people around us.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's really great. I was joking that this is like, when everyone's saying that this is like a new thing, that this is kind of like the Earth's tradition. It just doesn't come around as frequently. So it's always jarring for us as people inhabiting the Earth, but I don't think it's just jarring for the Earth itself. So thank you for that, Tina.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi, everyone. I figured I'd give a little bit of my thoughts on everything. So I personally, realizing I don't have a lot of thoughts on like traditions and rituals regarding death, but I personally feel a lot of fear when it comes to death, whether it be my own death or my loved ones. And I think a lot of it has to do with my family kind of assimilating into majority like American culture. So in that happening, I have no rituals. Like one of the biggest deaths for me happened last year, where one of my best friends from high school died, and for me it was very life-changing. But also because I had gone down to New Orleans where she was living, and went through the whole like second line experience and everything. And that for me like really was like groundbreaking, and like the sense of like how we mourn as humans and how we can come together and how we can be there for each other and have this sense of comfort and amongst all of the chaos and everything with each other. So that for me was really important to experience. And also using art as a form of grieving too. In grieving for my friend, I was able to do a dance of sorts performance where I could not only be seen by people who both know me and don't know me, but also express myself fully. It was like a mostly freestyle performance where I was able to kind of grieve my friend through my art form, which was really nice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, well, thank you all. This is really wonderful. It's so nice to sit and have a space to talk about all this. Like I said, we really want this to be ongoing, so stay tuned through the Solidarity.
Can I do a last quote?
Yeah, go for it.
Quote? So one of the things that have got me through is the quote by Khalil Gibran on sorrow. If you ever get to read Khalil Gibran, the prophet, it is so amazing. But in there is a short poem where it's talked to me about grief and sorrow. And there's a line in it that says, the deeper that sorrow carves you out for your joy. And the deeper your sorrow, the more joy you can contain. And so know that there are moments, like perhaps even in this time, where we're being deeply carved out, but it's also going to ultimately be the definition of our future joy. And sometimes you're carved out and filled up simultaneously. But I really love the idea of that. And part of the way that it really came to pass is I had the privilege of unexpectedly ending up on a Swiss mountain, which is a whole other story. But there was a moment where I was above the clouds and standing over the edge, and I was crying popsicle tears because in that moment, I felt the loss of my daughter. I felt those deep, tender places, and they gave that joy of that moment definition. And I was able to hold both. I was still felt the deep tenderness of the loss of my daughter, the loss of my grandmother, and all of those losses. But I was being filled up, and neither one distracted from the other. And I think it is like being a vessel of life. If we love, inevitably, we will also miss those that we love.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you again soon.
All right, bye.